Nana is as familiar with Flaxa Mildväder as Flaxa is with her, and so the behemoth still has no idea about her mirror image's presence in the castle. It's as it has to be, as Flaxa knows Nana well enough to know she would not fight fairly, and she can't afford to give Nana the chance to prepare for the coming battle. Soon, when the last star has blinked into the dawn, when Nana is at her strongest, that is when Flaxa will attempt to exorcise her from the castle.
Det inte bättre att ta henne när hon är svag?
Nej, kloke. Vi måste bekämpa det onda när det är som starkast.
There are nitpicks to be made here. I don't really want to make them, but I have to. In the book, neither Nana nor Flaxa Mildväder are entirely human. They are elemental beings, and therefore their confrontation has to be conducted according to the laws of nature, whereby the strongest wins. Today we know nature doesn't work like that. In nature you either eat or you're eaten, damn the means by which you do it. And I think that's one of several reasons why Grönros ultimately changed a few things from how their confrontation does go down. But it does make the statement Flaxa just made all the more senseless. I just want to acknowledge that before it kicks off. With quiet certainty, Flaxa prepares for the coming dawn, arranging all the pieces she will need to cast the evil out. She removes the ring from its box and places it upon the windowsill, and calls a servant with a message for the lord and lady. They must meet her at dawn, waiting for her outside of Nana's room. To Kloke she gives another instruction. She tells him what to do, when to act, and what to wait for. All the while, the ring quietly watches, its pearl gazing into the dark night and all the evil in the world. With the menial arrangements made, she now turns to the open window and patiently waits in the growing moonlight. With the night surrounding her and the summer winds flowing through her, she prepares herself for the coming dawn. As the sun crests the distant horizon, there is finally only two things left. From a pair of burlap sheets, she carefully unveils two of Albert's glass tears and let them fill with the growing dawn. In the distance there is only one star left, and as it vanishes, Flaxa threads the ring on her finger, lifts each of the glass tears to hold them, and wait for Nana to begin her flagellating cacophony before she moves towards her bedchamber. As per her instruction, the lord and lady had defied the revulsion of Nana's presence in their home, and Flaxa find them waiting for her outside the governess's chambers. The lord asks what the glassware is, as Flaxa offers one to him and the lady. Enchanted, the lady states they look like tears. They are tears, the old witch answers, and tells them to hold them until it's all over. When Flaxa turns towards the doors, they open as if of their own volition, as if they've come alive to invite the three of them in, or maybe as if they were pulled open by another force entirely. Flaxa is first through the door, and unquestioningly the lord and lady follow her inside as Nana finishes another lesson. "Sing after me!" she screams at the children, scared stiff and mute by her.
Är det fel på öronen idag igen? Tror ni att ni ska slippa straff? Är ni rädda nu?
Both at once the children's voices scream aloud as Nana's fingers wrap around their ears and she growls, "I will teach you what's done with such cowardly, empty vessels!" Hearing those words, Flaxa closes her eyes and unleashes her power through the room. Her lips unmoving, her voice announces, "You will have your empty vessels," as the furniture twists and turns away from the floor, hurled against the wall by unseen powers, and leaving the floor between them a cleared area, as Nana turns to stare, shocked, at the unexpected intruder, still holding the children by their ears.
Du, vad gör du här? Så lätt går det inte.
Knowing Flaxa as well as she knows her, the elder witch's intent is clear enough. A creature of nature as much as herself, Nana is a beast among men, and she will not be chased off like some starving stray cat. Here, rested in her den, she is at her most dangerous, and she is unafraid to prove it. Inhaling deeply, she seems to gather her strength before a resonant growl escapes her closed lips. Deep, deep breaths slowly churn through her body to escape as violent winds, and little by little, the shadows begin to move. For every second the room grows darker as the evil witch stretches her power to usurp the assailing light, and the shadows burn feverishly behind her, and soon she will release all of it towards Flaxa. Kloke flees her arm to settle in the rafters above, but Nana pays him no mind. Nothing but the fearful blue eyes exist to her, as her might billows around her. Flaxa stares her down, but Nana sees her failing. In this moment, here and now, she is about to die, helpless and afraid as Nana annihilates her, and with Nana's entire might let loose in the room about them, the ring burns in her palm. Even as the light is squeezed out of the room, even as Nana summons all the darkness she owns, Flaxa waits just a moment longer. Above their heads, Kloke screams aloud to show her the ring! And when she can't hold on any longer, her hand flies off of the violently blazing ring. Little by little, the chaos unleashed in the room settles, as the angry red shine from the pearl flitters in the air around it, like the sunlight caught in the reflections of a whirlpool. Nana's attention shifts from the scared blue eyes of Flaxa to the fiery glare of the jewel. As the last gusts of wind leaves the building, sunk into hidden depths, the horrid dark pearl stares into Nana's widening eyes. The triumphant smile that had stretched her tense mouth becomes a manic smile as she looks into those irretrievable depths of horror. All of the evil there is in life, gently fanned by the gusts of her being.
Kom då, Nana. Kom. Den är din.
Consumed by the whirling blackness of the jewel, Nana is compelled to walk forwards. With all that she is, she wants it. It's literally calling to her, and eagerly she answers. With every step closer, her essence flows freely, and she voices it loudly in halting, pleasured moans and groans before her voice rises into a dissonant song. That's when Flaxa dares to let her eyes shift from the menacing creature to Kloke and signal him to move. The raven takes flight, and as Nana is upon her, he swoops in and grabs the pearl out of the ring, to only leave the flat white silver embrace to blindly stare back at Nana. She can't even begin to see what happened before it's too late. All at once, the last of her power fades away. All the color leaves her eyes, and her voice shrinks and softens.
Blunda inte nu, Nana. Barn blir vad man gör dem till. Se på dina krukor.
Where the children once stood, there is now only two quiet, lifeless, empty vessels of crockery. As if signaled, permissed, or simply liberated, the cockatoo Mimi lets out a penetrating scream, louder than any she has made before. Across the castle, from its heart to its walls, one by one, every brittle surface, from the glassware to the mirrors, break under the force of her voice. And when it stops, the only sounds heard is that of gently falling trinkets coming to rest on the floor. Kloke leaves his perch in the rafters to land on Mimi's swaying cage and opens it for her. She doesn't say a word, but doesn't have to. In the ancient days they were young together. They can understand each other. So without a word, she takes flight, and without a glance back, she leaves through a broken window.
Vi ses igen någon gång.
Ja, Nana. Vi ses igen.
No, This was the last of very few appearances Ann-Katrin Palme ever made on film. And why that is, I'm not sure. I don't want to be morbid, I assume she has passed away now, but did it happen immediately after filming wrapped up? Or was her entire career consumed by this one film? Because if so, I think that's incredibly unfair. We were robbed of a great artistic talent. But at the very least, Grönros allowed her the dignity of leaving the screen and having her character say her lines in her own voice. A question I can answer is what just happened. Like I said, Grönros made several important changes to how the conflict is resolved from the book, and all of them deserve to be addressed. In the book, Flaxa refuses to move until Kloke's eye is restored, because she needs to know what awaits her before she can save the children. And the battle between Flaxa and Nana is much less dramatic. In the book, they simply stare daggers at each other, and Flaxa wins because she is more powerful than Nana, and that's it. The children do get turned into pottery, but there's no wind or darkness flailing about. They do just stare at each other until Nana gives in. So I want to talk about the changes Grönros made and why. In the book, Gripe states their battle has to be one of power, in accordance with the laws of nature. Therefore, no tricks or deceit could be used against one another, except Flaxa still mistrusts Nana to not fight fairly, so she remains hidden until she is ready. Meaning she lets her sense of pride get in the way of helping the children. That's not good. Not to mention, throughout the book and the movie, Nana and Flaxa are each other's opposing reflections. Where Nana is evil, Flaxa is good. Nana is brutal, while Flaxa is peaceful. Nana is oppressive, while Flaxa is restrained. To make their contest a battle of power feels at odds with how Flaxa has been portrayed up to that point. And it plays with the principle of solving one's problems through magic, something even the book had been careful to avoid up until that point. While in the movie Flaxa was not above tricking Nana, she still did so only when Nana was at her strongest. That may seem counterintuitive and prideful, but it ties in with how she wins. Nana is abusive for the sake of being abusive. She wants power to make others suffer simply because she could. In a sense, evil itself is power to her, and because the Black Pearl reflects all the evil in the world, Flaxa needed Nana to release all of her power, to lure her into depleting all of her power into the ring. I like this better than the book, partly because it's more dramatic, and partly it fits better with her characters. Nana is a domineering powerhouse you don't question for fear of her harming you. Flaxa is a wise shadow on the wall that you listen to for guidance. Further on, Nana has been openly flaunting her power throughout the film, while Flaxa remained a bystander. It made their struggle much more tense, with it feeling like there's no way Flaxa could win unless she did something neither we nor Nana could see coming. That's not to say it's faultless. In the book, the reason Flaxa waited to save the children was because Kloke didn't have his knight's eye. She didn't want to risk making things worse or failing by not knowing what she was getting into. In the book, as soon as Sofia gives her the ring, Kloke gets his knight's eye back, but in the film he still doesn't have it during the confrontation. The ring does end up being integral to her saving the children, I'd argue even more so than it was in the book. But Flaxa had no idea she would end up needing it before she came to the castle, so there was no reason for her to wait until she was given it. And incidentally, where she suddenly realized she would need to take the Lord up on his offer, I don't know, but compared to the book, I think these are minor inconsistencies. From this point on, the film plays out pretty much exactly the way it does in the book. So much so, I think I could read the book verbatim and the scenes would sync up. But doing that would make the injection of my subsequent critiques all the more jarring. Defeated and cowed, Nana quickly leaves the castle without a glance to anyone but Flaxa. Not the lord or lady, she keeps a wide stance between all of them and herself. Even the two silent vessels on the floor. Looking between Flaxa and them, the lady asks if they'll ever be alive again. Turning to her, Flaxa answers, "No, Not for as long as they stay in this house. The lady briefly wavers in the Lord's hands, only to steady herself with hope. What if they get to go home? Then they may become themselves again.
Ja, men det var då för väl. Tack. Tack. Tack, mamsell.
Because the Lord has never wanted for anything, immaterial or otherwise, he doesn't understand wish fulfillment, he doesn't understand desire, and he doesn't understand gratitude. And the way the film showed this was him being unable to say thank you until this moment, when what he wanted was for the children to be all right, which was a wish that he could not, which was probably the first thing he had wished for anything in his life. And it was something that he could not make, because it was something that he could not make happen. So having it been given to him, for lack of a better word, made him feel gratitude for the first time in his life. But that's not what this is about. What it's about is how the Lord is very gradually beginning to understand his wife's viewpoint regarding wish fulfillment, desire, and, like I said, gratitude. It's that, and he's continuing to take those small steps towards understanding her, and yeah, so things should be turning out all right for them if it keeps going this way. Now, why the children were turned into urns is lost in translation. When Flaxa first confronted Nana, she heard Nana call them krukor, which literally means urns. However, if you call someone a kruka, you're calling them a coward. Nana was very gradually destroying the children's personalities, leaving them nothing but terrified, empty husks. So when Nana wasn't looking, and when Flaxa drained her power, she also turned the children into urns. It's very poetic, and very confusing, and very difficult to translate. Empty vessels was really the best compromise between all of that I could come up with. And I guess this leaves only one question left to be answered.
Men vem var hon egentligen, Nana?
Hon är min syster.
Something the book never tried to hide. The first time Flaxa sees Nana at the castle, it mentions they are sisters. And this doesn't really change anything, but it does make the connection between them all the more intriguing, as well as speak to the subtext regarding them being each other's mirror images. Both of them are witches, both of them have birds for familiars, and it speaks to the poetic connection between all opposing forces. And I think if the movie had mentioned this earlier, it would have come across less as a battle between good and evil, and more as a run-of-the-mill family squabble. All that's left for Flaxa now is to bring the children home. A year has passed since the children vanished, a year almost to the day. The springtime market has come again, but where Albert and Sophia would normally set up their stall, now they simply walk about the marketplace, quietly watching the scene unfold. Sophia catches the eye of a raven, quietly watching her from a round pole fence. Briefly she mistakes it for Kloke, but Kloke only has one eye. This raven has two. But there was something so familiar about it. It turned one eye and regarded her with an expression she couldn't understand. But she had met that gaze before, she just couldn't remember when. Her heart began beating in her chest. An inexplicable sensation filled her, a frightening feeling of impossibility. It couldn't be. And still she knew immediately that this unreadable dark stare had looked at her in the moonlight once and blinked at her the way it did now. She knew it. As she twists her ring finger, the raven takes flight and she follows it up above the forest. When it vanishes above the green, she lets her gaze slowly sink below the tree line until she catches sight of 3 people walking towards them. One is Flaxa Mildväder, the other... Her heart stops when she sees. Albert follows her stare until he sees them as well. It can't be. But not a day seems to have gone by for them. They're still wearing the same clothes, and seem as happy and playful now as they did. All at once, Albert and Sophia runs forwards to embrace their children, and for the longest time they are unwilling to ever let them go, as the solemn day draws to a warm summer night. By the drip of the evening dew and the whistling passage of time, Flaxa Mildväder returns to her cabin to stand under the apple tree, with the raven settled upon a branch above her. The tree had bloomed over now, but she saw it would carry much fruit in the autumn, more than she could ever count. Well, Kloke, what does your eyes see now?
Everything. Kloke sees everything.
Do you know the past, and do you see what it will be?
Before the sun knew where it lived, before the moon knew its might, before the stars knew where they stood, Kloke knew what life was.
Then I can keep weaving. How do I even summarize this movie? It's a children's story made for adults. It's brilliant. It's artistic, it's profound, it's criminally underrated. And it's a bit boring. And dated. Don't get me wrong, I love this movie to hell and back, and there is nothing anyone can say to convince me it isn't one of the most important pieces of Swedish cinema ever made. Right up there alongside The Seventh Seal and Evil. If you get a chance to see it, I beg you take it, because this review does not do it justice. But I have to admit there are weaknesses to it that makes me understand why less and less people remember or recognize it, aside from the snafu surrounding its budget and premiere. The story is pretty drawn out. There are a lot of moving parts to it with many actors, but it's primarily driven by the emotions of the characters rather than a call for action. Most of the film is spent exploring the loss and tragedy surrounding the children rather than trying to solve it. It's a very different creature from most common popular kids films that only try to entertain kids or show them how any and all problems can be overcome in Fantasyland. While this film also has a happy ending, it spends long enough focusing on the characters having to persevere through the darkness that a lot of the time it feels hopeless, like this is the way things are and it's not going to change. This is a reality a lot of people, children and adults, are living, and it's refreshing for a kids film to acknowledge that, while showing even if you can't solve it, it doesn't necessarily last forever. I think that's an important thing to know, and unusual for a kids film to address, but this film is not made according to any kind of tried and tested formula for mass appeal and entertainment. It's not fast and flashy, the characters aren't larger than life, it doesn't show kids that they can overcome anything, it gets downright depressing and even disturbing at times, which sounds good if you're a fan of horror, but it's not even meant to thrill so much as make you think and feel. The earliest horror movie I remember watching was Poltergeist when I was maybe 6 years old, and I know I saw this film before that. I think what happened was my mother bought it, and when she watched it I would join her because I wanted to be included. I just don't see a lot of kids sitting down to watch this movie for no other reason than they want to, and annoyingly, I have to admit I think a lot of adults would be bored by it as well. The film also takes some leaps in logic. That criticism seems redundant, and I don't want to dismiss any of what the children have gone through, but I can't believe there weren't worse things happening in the world at that time, and yet, despite being able to watch all of history, this one case of kidnapping essentially crippled Kloke. That, and even though he can see history backwards and forwards, he still didn't see losing his eye or the events in the meantime coming. My response to that is the book was written before the logical, rule-abiding, nerdy magic of Dungeons & Dragons became popular, and if anything, Kloke is a parable of modern internet usage. Everyone has all the information in the world at their fingertips, and everyone can make educated guesses to what's about to happen next. Yet we don't do that because we're not really that bothered. Both the book and the movie established first thing what Flaxa, and by extension Kloke, was really concerned with was her small village, and therefore any misfortune, even if it's small compared to other things, is still a catastrophe in that small village. You can see many parables in that, and although the world has changed since the book was written, the same parables can be made. The thing is, being small-minded is generally something criticized by self-appointed enlightened people, as is a lot of the lessons the stories seek to teach. Another critique I have is, despite the story revolving around them and most of the scenes devoted to them, the children don't feel like the main characters. They are well developed and at the center of everything, but only as something like a bargaining chip with them having value to everyone else. They feel less like people and more like a treasure that's either desired or kept. However, that's what reality is like for a child, even today. You have no real autonomy as a kid. Everything is either decided for you, given to you, or taken from you, depending on what the adults want for you or expect from you. In that, I feel this film is one of the few to accurately portray what childhood is like, both romanticized and realistic. And that may have been part of what drew me in as a kid, but I definitely see it's not something all kids would be interested in. There are two schools of thought when it comes to raising children, with a lot of grey area between them. Some people think their innocence should be protected until they discover for themselves that life isn't a fairy tale. Others think they should be exposed early on to wisen them up and prepare them for adulthood. I don't have children, so my opinion is invalid, but my sister has said she would let her children watch whatever they want, so long as they clear it with her first and they understand that watching whatever it is their choice. With that in mind, I'd say this film is a nice way of introducing kids to the darker parts of life, if they don't find themselves bored in the first 10 minutes and ask you to put on Minions instead. Like I said, I think it's an important film that everyone should see at least once, and I remember being made to both read the book and watch the movie when I was in school. But in addition to being pretty boring, a lot of the subtext is so highbrow it will fly over children's heads. And I know I praised that in the beginning of the film, but I do recognize that's a double-edged sword. For example, on the surface the film presents the idea that money is the root of all evil. Being poor, Albert and Sophia are mostly concerned about money and take their children for granted, and being wealthy, the lord and lady have imprisoned themselves with meaningless trinkets. Not only do I think it's terribly tone-deaf to suggest poor people are happier without money, but rich people being miserable when they can buy the world is simply not true. With that said, I don't think that's what Maria Gripe meant when she wrote the story. Rather than money just being evil, I think the story argues people don't always know what they want, but they confuse getting it with happiness, and money is the most obvious means of wish fulfillment. All of the characters wish for things they don't have, but what they wish for isn't really what they want, and so it doesn't make them happy. Then there is the nature of good and evil. It's very nice and simple to say being good means wanting to make people happy, and being evil is wanting to hurt people, but real life is more complicated than that. Several characters do some pretty awful things in the story, both unintentionally and deliberately, and it's easy to understand why they do the things they do. Except for Nana, none of them actually wants to hurt people, but they feel they need to. That seems like a distinction without a difference, especially if you have been victimized, but showing that selfish actions have consequences people don't consider, or maybe even ignore, is far more eloquent than saying anyone who does bad things is just evil. It's not about sympathy, but responsibility. Disgusting word, I know, but stay with me. Aside from Nana and Flaxa Mildväder, none of the characters understood how their actions affected people around them until they had a realization about it towards the end. Unfortunately, the movie skipped over that bit, but it's in the book, and the movie still lets you put the pieces together.
The Lord and Lady caused all of it even if they didn't mean to, because they were too preoccupied with their own issues. They had reasons for doing what they did. If you have a shred of empathy, you can't really hold their actions against them, but they did cause the entire mess. What's done is done at that point, but understanding what they've done, they still put their egos aside and try to make amends. And that, I think, is a valuable lesson to take from this film. It teaches kids that sometimes what they do will have consequences they didn't or couldn't have foreseen. But if they realize, they should take responsibility. Today, when it's easier than ever to see how everything in the entire world is connected, it's become nearly impossible to take responsibility for anything. Because no matter what you do, someone else is going to suffer for it. I think that's why popular movies talk less about responsibility and more about poetic justice, and if a character is sympathetic, they may not have to take responsibility for their actions at all. The thing is, this film isn't trying to save the world, it's trying to talk about some very uncomfortable truths that a lot of children are never shown, and maybe teach a moral lesson or two along the way. You look too closely at it, any of the smaller lessons this movie teaches aren't entirely welcome in our modern world. It encourages humility, almost to the point of janteloven, and for people to be happy with what they have no matter what it is. And there are several issues in suggesting your wishes coming true is only a bad thing. What you have to remember is this is still a kids' film, and interpreting it from a socioeconomic perspective isn't entirely meaningful, even if you can, and the more obvious morals still hold up. You can't buy love, getting your wishes doesn't mean you'll be happy, you should appreciate what you have because sooner or later it may be taken away from you, and being sad isn't necessarily your fault, but you should perhaps not blame anyone else for it either. They are humble ideals and perhaps not the greatest guiding light if you're a YouTuber or an artist, but to have that in the back of my head that achieving your dreams and aspirations aren't the be-all end-all of your existence is actually a pretty comforting thought that I think more people should take to heart. So no, The Glassmaker's Children is not beyond reproach, but god damn if it isn't the single best executed film that I have seen in my life. I would say more positives to balance out all the negatives I just mentioned, but I don't think I could add anything that I haven't already said in the review. It's a fantastic film that I only wish more people could enjoy. Like I said earlier, it seems to have faded away from most inventories, and I can't find any plans on giving it a Blu-ray release, which is a shame because it's such a worthwhile movie. With that said, was it worth the headache Grönros cost his investors, actors, film crew, and the completion bond company? The thing about the film industry is nothing ever goes to plan, and even if every film is a for-profit endeavor, every film is also a gamble. You gamble that the producers are professionals, the actors are talented, the script is good, and the director knows what he's doing. I get Grönros feeling justified, and I'm more than happy with the result, but he did also financially bury himself and everyone who worked with the film. If you're blissfully cynical, like me, it's easy to say Grönros was clearly in the wrong for not working with the funds he had, while expecting to just be covered after he went over budget. But Grönros was the director. It was his job to turn the film from a collection of notes, scripts and directionless cast members into a cohesive whole that people actually would want to see. And that demands resources, sometimes more than one expected. I think there is more of a case to be made for Birkeland failing at his job as a producer, overestimating how far the budget would reach, but even then that was the money he could procure and what he offered Grönros to work with. So I think the question is a bit backwards. It's not about whether Grönros was justified, it's about what he managed to pull off. And what he pulled off was a masterpiece that, even if it fades from the market, at the very least I did my part to memorialize. I am so happy I took the time to review this film, partly to recognize something nearly unheard of and for a change of pace, but also because I learned so many things about the film I didn't know before. I noticed how Claes and Clara were never given names when they were in the castle, and how even the Lord and Lady were said to belong to the house, not the other way around. I learned about how so many actors essentially vanished after this film. I wonder if Grönros made a deal with the devil to get the film off the ground, or maybe the film is a genuine wisdom's well where half the people involved sank to the bottom. The Glassmaker's Children is a masterpiece, from text to screen. On occasion I have found myself discussing the differences between entertainment and art, and if you ever find yourself about to have that conversation, for God's sakes change the subject. It's tedious, frustrating, and all either of you have are ideas that you can't back up. True enough, the editing is a little janky, and its morals are open for discussion, but the story is heartbreaking, the photography picturesque, the acting is astounding, the scenery emotional, the subtext is clever. No, it's not perfect, but all of its faults are nitpicks only wankers like me who go looking for them will find, instead of just sitting back and enjoying a good movie. I sentence The Glassmaker's Children to a solid 20-carat 10 on a scale of 11. There is only one single thing that keeps it from taking that mythical 11th place. It's not a found footage movie. And I haven't abandoned those. This video was not a prelude to a massive redressing of my channel where I only review obscure highbrow classics that will make your head feel tired when watching them. Partly because I don't know a lot of other highbrow classics that will make your head feel tired. Even if you wouldn't tire of those kinds of reviews, I would. This one video nearly killed me. I loved every second of making it, but goddamn if I'm not happy it's over. Movies that try to be more than entertainment, they are incredible, but when I watch a movie, I do mostly look to be entertained. With that in mind, how do I follow this up? This alright?